Yes, we've just finished the fast of the 9th of Av, which commemorates the destruction of both the temples, and particularly the second temple in the year 70 AD, and really marked the collapse of Jewish life in Judea. So it's certainly relevant to show how the Jewish people really rebuilt their Jewish lives after such a catastrophe, but also really in the modern context. We're going to sort of go back 2,000 years in history, and I hate to say it, but the reality was there was a Jewish presence there in Judea 2,000 years ago, which is now actually being denied by our Palestinian brethren. So the historical evidence that's going to come anecdotally through will just reaffirms a Jewish presence that was there. I'm just going to touch upon briefly in the aftermath of the destruction of the temple, and really to show the magnitude from the Roman perspective, how they viewed this. They viewed this as a major conquest in terms of the coinage, in terms of the Arch of Titus that we'll talk about in a moment. So Judea was not an insignificant province to them. The overcoming of the revolt took a number of years and really engaged some of their best leadership, Vespasian, who became Caesar, and also Titus. So look, David, perhaps if you can kick off.
Yes, for Jerusalem is ruined and Judah is fallen. Thy men have fallen by the sword and the mighty in the war. And her gates shall lament and mourn, and she, being desolate, shall sit upon the ground. Emperor Vespasian minted coins commemorating the hard-fought Roman victory over Judea. The Judea Capta series lasted for 25 years and were issued in bronze, silver, and gold.
Yeah, so it was a major victory for the Romans, as you can see, in terms of the minting of the coins. You can see on the coin here the Roman soldier. You can see the Jewish maiden under the tree, the palm tree, the date palm of the Judea. And again, without stating the obvious, that means these coins attest to a Jewish presence in Judea. There was a further revolt in the year 133, and that was really the total end of the story. But it really, after the destruction of the temple, which was very much the focus of Jewish life, that was an incredible challenge for the Jewish people, and we'll see how they dealt with it. Yeah, Tony, do you want to read?
The arch was the Arch of Titus. The arch was built shortly after the death of Titus in 81 CE and was commissioned by his brother Domitian, who succeeded him as emperor. It is decorated with a series of carvings celebrating Titus' most illustrious victory, the struggle against the Jewish rebels that culminated in the capture of, I can't see,
Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem, yes.
So again, this is just highlighting the significance of the victory. So just a short clip, just to bring us up to speed. I really, the reason why I'm doing this, just to show the magnitude of the destruction and really the reality on the ground that the Jews had to deal with.
Titus's conquest of Jerusalem in the year 70 CE was considered a tremendous achievement by the Romans. His suppression of the lone rebellion in Judea proved once again that the Roman Empire was the strongest power in the world. On the Temple Mount, the Roman army cheers its venerated commander Titus. While Jerusalem goes up in flames, Titus quickly prepares the exhibits for the victory parade in Rome. For this purpose, he gathers many valuable objects and prisoners of war. But the celebrations begin even before they arrive. Here in Caesarea, in Beirut, in Agrippa's kingdom in the north, they are drunken parties. To entertain the crowds, thousands of Jews are thrown into beasts of prey and into combat against bloodthirsty gladiators. When Titus finally anchors in Rome, the Romans flock to greet him. The most magnificent victory parade in the empire's history gets underway. The parade begins with a colossal display of strength by the Roman legions. The Roman gods lead the way, followed by a vast stream of spoils of war, silver and gold vessels, ivory, works of art, and animals. Titus brought so much silver and gold and spoils from Jerusalem that their price dropped throughout the empire. Vespasian would use some of the captured treasure to build the Colosseum, the most magnificent Roman amphitheater in the world. The crowd is amazed at the vast amount of plunder, but the climax arrives when the holy temple vessels are paraded before the masses, including the golden menorah. Behind them, like a prisoner of war, is carried the representative of the Jewish faith, a single Torah scroll from Jerusalem. In the rear are led the prisoners of war themselves. Defeated and disgraced, the POWs from Israel march through the streets of Rome. Their war wounds are well concealed by the embroidered silk garments they're dressed in by the Romans. But nothing can take away the searing pain they bear in their hearts. The crowds cheer Vespasian and Titus as the victory parade makes its way here to the Capitoline Hill. Here, at the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, the parade stops, and a hush falls on the crowd. Simon Bar Giora, Jewish commander and spirited leader of the rebellion, is pulled from among the ranks of rebels. With a rope around his neck, he is dragged brutally through the streets of Rome as the wild throng beats him from all sides. The Romans immortalized the conquest of Jerusalem and this parade with a glorious monument situated in the heart of the empire's capital. Exactly where the victory parade passed, Domitian, Titus's brother, built a 15-meter high gate in honor of the great victory. Depicted in the relief on the arch are Roman soldiers crowned with laurel wreaths as they carry the temple vessels, the silver trumpets, the showbread table, and in the center, the temple menorah, painted gold. No wonder the Jews of Rome despised the Arch of Titus. The monument, built 2,000 years ago, served as a painful reminder of the total destruction of Jerusalem and the humiliation of the Jewish people.
Okay, let's just leave the end of the video to the end. So I remember a couple of years ago, the Foreign Minister of Israel had an audience with the Pope, and he asked him if he could look into the archives and catacombs of the Vatican if the menorah is still there, so they're still waiting for an answer. So let's just look now how under these type of conditions really the Jewish people and Judaism survived, and we'll share really three aspects. One is the hope that they will return. Second of all, really, is the creation of the synagogue, and then the reinvention of Judaism by one of the great leaders called Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Perhaps as a classic to lead this off in terms of the hope and the positivity, there's a great story that's set in the Talmud. Perhaps Ian, I can see if you could share that.
Rabban Gamaliel, Rabbi Eliezer, and Ben Azariah, Rabbi Joshua, and Rabbi Akiva went up to Jerusalem. When they reached the Temple Mount, they saw a fox emerging from the place of the Holy of Holies. The others started weeping. Rabbi Akiva laughed. They said to him, "Why are you laughing?" He replied, "Why are you weeping? A place so holy that it is said of it, the stranger that approaches it shall die. And now foxes traverse it, and we shouldn't weep?" He replied, "That is why I laugh. For Uriah said, therefore, because of you, Zion shall be plowed as a field, Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the Temple Mount like the high place of a forest. With Zechariah it is written, old men and women shall yet sit in the streets of Jerusalem. But now that Uriah's prophecy has been fulfilled, it is certain that Zechariah's prophecy will be fulfilled." With these words they replied to him, "Akiva, you have consoled us. Akiva, you have consoled us."
So he foresaw, the Rabbi Akiva was the great optimist. He had hope that the prophet foretold the destruction, but the prophets also told of the rebuilding. It may have taken 2,000 years for us to return, but eventually we got there. So, but hope is extremely important in terms of the Jewish narrative, as Rabbi Isaac will share with us.
How was it that Jews managed to survive every catastrophe? Exile, dispersion, persecution, the works. And the answer that kept coming back to me was hope. Jews kept hope alive, and hope kept the Jewish people alive. Then I started thinking, doesn't everyone hope? And that was when I realized that not every culture is a hope culture. And it was Jews who really created the intellectual revolution that made hope possible. If this world isn't just happenstance, if it was created in love by a creator, if that creator communicated with us, if that communicator empowered us, if he said, "I give you freedom, and I know in giving you freedom you'll make mistakes, but this I promise you, when you stumble, I will lift you. When you fail, I will give you strength. And when you make mistakes, if you recognize their mistakes, I will forgive you." That is the basis of hope. And you cannot have Judaism without hope. And I think you can't have hope without at least some influence of the Jewish view of the world.
And that's what I mean, on a tangible note, that's why the national anthem of Israel is Hatikva, which means the hope. But certainly that hope was really translated in very practical terms, as the psalmist says, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither and forget its cunning." And therefore we never forgot the destruction. We fasted just last week on the 9th of Av to remember that destruction. All synagogues are built facing Jerusalem. In our primary prayer, the Amidah, we ask that Jerusalem be rebuilt, and in our synagogues and homes on our most significant festivals, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and at the Pesach Passover Seder, we finish next year in Jerusalem. And this was said throughout some of the darkest and most trying periods for the Jewish people, but that vision of next year in Jerusalem gave them hope. Similarly, when it comes to life cycle events, we break a glass under a marriage canopy to remember the destruction, and the traditional greetings for mourners at the end of life, we comfort them together with the other mourners of Jerusalem and Zion. So throughout this period of exile, we never forgot Jerusalem, we never forgot the temple. The Kotel, today we call it the Kotel or the Kotel Marabi, but it was traditionally called the Wailing Wall, because there was a small alleyway where Jews had access, and when they came there on pilgrimages, they invariably cried the destruction. And all this contributed really to the hope of rebuilding, and this was one key pillar that enabled their survival. But on a more tangible note also, there was a very famous story just on the eve of the destruction of the temple. Well, actually, Donna, I can see if you can begin. So this is in the confines of the temple, the confines of Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been under siege by the Romans. Unfortunately, there was incredible infighting amongst Jews within the city of Jerusalem at that time. There were zealots that wanted to fight the Romans, and the rabbis, who were led by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, wanted to come to a deal with the Romans. And this really classic story, which we'll continue on the next slide, just provides a bit of background again to that period and the future rebuilding. Donna?
Yes. Abba Streck, the head of the Beremin, the streamless Jewish militant, was the brother-in-law of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and sent a message to Abbas Seker, "Come to me in secret." Our wise spoke.
That's Yochanan, yeah.
Yochanan ben Zakkai. "How long are you going to continue to destroy the city of Ferment?" He answered, "What can I do? The situation is out of my control. If I say anything opposition the idea of my comrade, they will kill me." And then Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai told his brother-in-law to devise a plan to enable him to leave the city to negotiate with the Romans. Rabbi proposed that he pretend to be seriously ill, then had to the word spread that he was on his deathbed, and finally that he had died. His student will then pretend to carry his coffin for burial outside the city. With his student acting as a pallbearer, the coffin approached to the gate. So environment guard post just within the wall of Jerusalem. The zealots. Yeah, and then the guards opened the gate and reluctantly let the small burial party through. When he reached the Roman camp, Rabbi Jonathan ben Zakkai greeted the general, "Peace be unto you, O king. Peace be unto you, O king." And Vastin's response, "You have incurred the death penalty twice. First, you have called me king, and I'm not the king. Second, if I'm indeed the king, why have you not come out to me earlier to show me the proper respect?" And then Rabbi Jonathan ben Zakkai answered, "I knew you had to be a king, because our prophet have foretold that the temple will fall only into the hand of a king. And the reason I haven't come out to you until now is that we are plagued by violent extremists within the city, who will not let me come out." A messenger arrived from Rome and announced, "Arise, the emperor have died, and the senator has decided to make Vespasian, general of the Legion of Rome, the new emperor."
So that was a critical moment, and at that point, Vespasian understood Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a holy man, and he asked him for a request. And he asked him the following things. He asked for the safety of the scholars in the city of Yavne. And again, the destruction of Jerusalem was imminent, so there he could establish a Jewish learning center. He asked for a descendant of the house of David, which was Rabbi Gamliel, And he asked physicians restore the health of one of the great leaders of Israel, Rabbi Tzadok, who had been fasting. Now the rabbis, when they heard this, etc., Rabbi Yosef, some say Rabbi Akiva, commented, God makes the wise foolish, for Ben Zakkai should have requested the preservation of Jerusalem. The question is why he asked for these things. Why he didn't ask that Jerusalem be spared? Well, he felt it was too much to ask. He said the Romans were there for 2 years. There was a siege, and he doubted that they would acquiesce to that request. Rather, he asked that for the opportunity after the destruction to begin life anew, and it seemed like trivial things. The city of Yavna to start a new center of learning, a descendant of the house of David to be allowed to live, and one of the leading scholars. So from a Roman perspective, it really wasn't something very difficult. But the reality was that nucleus enabled him to begin life anew. The Talmud makes a comment that Rabbi Yochanan on his deathbed made the comment he didn't know where he's going, whether to heaven or God forbid, hell. Perhaps some sort of allude back to this request that he made. Perhaps he should have asked for Jerusalem. So Rabbi Yochanan really and his team of scholars then began to reinvent Jewish life, as we can see. The other critical part of the renewal of Judaism was the synagogue. I think Jeanette?
Synagogue. After the restoration of the Second Temple, 352 BCE, the Great Assembly, led by Ezra, instituted the standardized communal prayer service. Thus was born the place of gathering, yet Knesset in Hebrew and synagogos in Greek. However, the primary public worship experience remained the journey to Jerusalem to participate in the temple service. After the destruction of the Second Temple, the synagogue acquired increased importance as a centre of Jewish communal life.
So let's remember, after the destruction of the First Temple, the community was exiled then to Babylon, to modern-day Iraq, and many actually stayed there, and centres of Jewish life started there. And that was the synagogue. The word synagogue does mean a house of gathering, but here's actually a very interesting clip done by a Christian author that really goes over the history of the synagogue and its importance in Jewish life and the survival of Judaism after the destruction of the Second Temple.
All around the world, synagogues are an integral part of Judaism. From the Greek meaning place of assembly, the synagogue today is referred to as a house of prayer, house of assembly, house of study, and in some cases even temple. While this institution's recent 2,000 years of history can be tracked relatively easily, its origins are still a bit of a mystery. There are no mentions of synagogues in the Old Testament of the Bible, so it's commonly believed that synagogues must have developed after the destruction of Solomon's temple in 586 BC. The reasoning goes that once robbed of the central element of the Jewish faith, the priests of Judah began teaching, reading, and studying Torah. Buildings, perhaps homes, were refurbished to facilitate this, and soon the synagogue, the assembly of faithful Jews observant to the covenant, became a cornerstone in Jewish society. One of the obvious benefits being that any community, despite their geographical location or distance from Jerusalem, could have their own synagogue. The earliest mention of synagogues may come from a 3rd century BC Egyptian inscription. Beyond this, by the 1st century AD, synagogues were a part of normal Jewish life, receiving mentions by Philo of Alexandria, Flavius Josephus, the New Testament, and rabbinic literature. Amazingly, just south of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the Theodotus inscription was found. It once adorned a synagogue that lived practically in the shadow of the temple, demonstrating that the two establishments were not competitive. The inscription tells us that synagogues had been around for some time. They were used for studying the scriptures, as a hostel, and they kept water for Jewish purification rituals. Early synagogues seem not to have been associated with prayer, likely because of the temple's scriptural role as a house of prayer. The temple's destruction by Rome in AD 70 changed the function and focus of synagogues. Without a place for sacrifice, festivals, and prayer, the people turned to their synagogues and emphasized what they could do to follow God, the sacrifices of studying scripture and praying 3 times a day to correspond to the times sacrifices used to be made at the temple. The temple had been destroyed before, and Judaism had been able to maintain a strong religious culture. Interestingly, the Torah Ark, the shelved box in which a synagogue's scriptures were kept, were also directly influenced by the destruction of the temple. As synagogues changed to preserve the memory of the temple, the Torah Ark was treated to represent the Holy of Holies, called an Ark to reference the Ark of the Covenant, decorated with temple motifs and sometimes flanked with curtains, as was the temple's Holy of Holies. The orientation of the seating benches also shifted from a central focus to a Torah shrine focus, which was normally located on the Jerusalem-facing wall.
So we've got hope, we've got the institution of the synagogue, but finally it was really Jewish learning and study. And again, this was, we have the Torah, which is the written law, and then we have all the interpretations. Now, these interpretations were never put down in writing, they were handed down from teacher to students, but it was in the year 189 that one of the leading scholars for the first time put the oral tradition into writing, and he gave, it's called the Mishnah, and that was a very brief synopsis of various Jewish laws. For the next 200 odd years then, the rabbis then expanded upon this and then created the Talmud. And this Talmud then sustained Jewish learning and discussion throughout this period of the exile to this day. Now here's a brief clip just explaining the historical background and meaning of the Talmud.
This is the Talmud. 63 tractates, 523 chapters, 2 million words. After the Bible, the Talmud is the most important work of Jewish literature and has defined Jewish learning for centuries. From the outside, the Talmud looks like a book, albeit a rather formidable book, but from the inside, it looks more like this. Why is it so complicated? To decipher the Talmudic daf or folio page, we first need to understand what the Talmud is, how it came to be created, and what a volume of Talmud contains. A volume of Talmud is not a book, it's a library of books. A typical volume of Talmud might include more than 100 works, composed by hundreds of authors over a period of more than 1,800 years. Let's deconstruct the daf and then rebuild it layer by layer. The oldest part of the Talmud is the Mishnah. Compiled by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi in the Holy Land more than 1,800 years ago, the Mishnah was the first officially transcribed record of Torah law, which up until that point had been handed down through the generations as an exclusively oral tradition. The Mishnah, however, is very concise, almost a shorthand. Over the next 300 years, many hundreds of Torah sages analyzed, discussed, and debated the teachings contained within the Mishnah, and these discussions became the Gemara, which together with the Mishnah constitute the Talmud. There are many pages of Gemara for each Mishnah, as these discussions often range far afield to include many additional teachings covering virtually every topic under the sun. The Gemara was completed in the beginning of the 6th century in Babylonia, written mostly in the Aramaic dialect that was the spoken language of the Jewish people at the time. Studying the Talmud is a challenging task. It requires knowledge of its often obscure terminology, being familiar with the many references to parallel Talmudic teachings, and an ability to follow the complex, multi-tiered arguments presented in its discussions. In fact, The Talmud presented on its own would be a closed book to all but the most advanced Talmud scholar. So over the centuries, hundreds of commentaries were written to decipher, explain, and discuss the Talmudic text. Some of these were published alongside the Talmud itself in recognition that they are indispensable to any attempt to properly understand the text. Rashi, the most basic and comprehensive of all Talmudic commentaries, was placed alongside the Talmudic text in some of the earliest manuscripts and published editions of the Talmud. But when one Talmud scholar writes a commentary, other scholars will offer alternative explanations or have additional questions and issues they feel the need to address. Flanking Rashi on the daf is Tosfot, which is actually an anthology of commentaries by dozens of sages, including a number of Rashi's disciples and descendants. The analytic and dialectic style of the Tosfot commentaries strongly influenced the manner in which Talmud has been studied over the centuries throughout Europe and beyond. Over the years, more elements were added to the daf to aid the student's navigation of the text. But there's a limit to how many commentaries a page can hold, even an oversized folio page of Talmud. So other major commentaries were added to the back pages of each tractate for ready reference, and many, many more. In addition, many more commentaries on the Talmud were published and continue to be published each year in separate volumes. Today, if you wish to research a complex issue, compare and contrast different opinions on a topic, trace back their sources, examine the issue's applications in multiple fields, you can open multiple windows on your screen and even hook up more screens to your computer. But centuries before Windows 1.0, centuries before electronic information technologies, Jews committed to exploring the multi-chambered laboratory of wisdom called the Talmud had already invented the original hypertext, the daf.
Just an interesting piece of trivia. So one of the earliest books printed was the Talmud. It was printed by an Italian Christian printer called Bomberg. And a few of these original editions, but going back to the 1500s, are still available. Interesting enough, one of them are in the Oxford Library in England, because when King Henry VIII had the challenge of wanting to divorce his first wife, which was not permitted then under Catholic law, he sought the advice of the rabbis, and he thought he may have a solution in the Talmud. So he asked one of those volumes, 60-volume sets, to be sent to him from Italy, and that still exists to this day, thanks to that purchase in the Oxford Library.
Nice.
So really, what has sustained the Jewish people was hope, the reinvention in a sense of Jewish life that was brought about through Yochanan ben Zakkai. Prayer services were introduced instead of sacrifices. The role of the synagogue and really the role of Jewish learning. So to bring things to the full circle, we mentioned right at the start that it was the menorah, which the Jews were asked to carry through the streets of Rome. So to humiliate them, in 1948, when the State of Israel was proclaimed, they specifically chose that menorah, which is depicted on the Arch of Titus as the new symbol of the Jewish state, to show that whereas Rome has been relegated to the history books, the Jewish people have returned back to their ancient homeland. So here we're just going to conclude with the balance of this video.
The sight of the arch seared the Jews' hearts like fire, and for centuries they refused to pass beneath it. Until 1947.
Of the Dutch Committee for Palestine was adopted by certain three votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
The day after November 29th, the day the UN Assembly declared the establishment of a Jewish state in the land of Israel, the Rabbi of Rome, Rabbi David Prato, convened the Jewish community before the detested arch. The rabbi wished to mark the historic occasion before his community, who gathered by the arch, along with representatives of the youth movements and refugees from the Holocaust, on their way to Israel. Moved to tears, the elderly rabbi, who had given thousands of speeches, couldn't utter a word. The rabbi cried out, "Who sustained us and kept us and brought us to this day." Then, instead of speaking, he started to march, followed by the whole community, straight into the Victory Arch. For the first time in 2,000 years, Jews passed through the Arch of Titus again. We walked through in the opposite direction, not like our ancestors 2,000 years ago, who passed through as slaves, but as a free people, as if we were walking back to freedom. We felt on top of the world.
Exodus 2nd.
Am Yisrael Chai. On that note, perhaps let's stop.
Yeah, amen to that.